So your second major pitch is one you've already talked about, is anti-sedition laws. And that's one that I think it's front and center in people's views of history, but you don't really think of it in a legalistic sense, and you totally convinced me on that one. Even though I think government needs to survive, it's one of, say, John Haidt's pillars of morals, is having a Hobbesian government that can stabilize things. But so give me your pitch on sedition laws in general. How do we protect the government yet not do sedition, okay?
Yeah, sedition has been the scourge of free speech for hundreds of years. And the Star Chamber was designed for sedition. It was designed as a speech prosecution forum or tribunal. And it was sedition that was much on the minds of framers when, and certainly drafters of the First Amendment. And people like James Madison wrote beautifully about sedition as a monster, which it is. The funny thing is that we've never broken our sedition addiction. We certainly reduced the number of speech prosecutions in this country as opposed to Great Britain and other countries. But we didn't break it entirely. And so we have had effective sedition prosecutions throughout our history with John Adams, but also throughout our history, we prosecuted people for speech. And we still use sedition charges, seditious conspiracy. And the question I ask in the book is why? Seditious conspiracy includes things like interrupting official proceedings. It is entirely redundant with other crimes. It's just that the government wants to convict people of sedition because it has that added bite that they have dangerous thoughts, what I call in the book bad tendency thoughts. And bad tendency thoughts were the justification for sedition prosecutions. And the book asks why we really need sedition. Even if you look at January 6th, there's only a small number of people charged with seditious conspiracy. The question is why? You know, they're charged with very serious crimes. Why did the government want to call them seditionists? And the answer is because it achieves a political purpose. It vilifies views, but it also suggests that you can be prosecuted for having bad tendency thoughts. And so what I suggest is we can eliminate sedition crimes once and for all. We can complete the work of James Madison. We can slay Madison's monster and just say that we're no longer going to prosecute sedition. We'll prosecute conduct. We'll prosecute people who try to stop our proceedings, including key proceedings in our constitutional process for the transfer of power. January 6th was serious. It was a desecration of our constitutional system. And it was important for us to prosecute them, but let's prosecute them for what they did, not for what they thought, what their values were. Prosecute them for what they did. They stopped a constitutional process. They stopped these proceedings. They engaged in violence. And that goes to much of the theme of the book, that many of the issues that we have allowed to distort our view of free speech is because we have lost the distinction between conduct and content. You don't have to prosecute people for what they believe. Prosecute for what they do. And a good example of that I raise in the book is that while we were arresting anarchists left and right, there was one group in New York that had been subject to investigation and prosecution because they were anarchists, and they were wronged. They should not have been prosecuted. But then one group, a small number of anarchists, decided that they were going to kill an industrialist. And they set about to build a bomb, which they were uniquely bad at. And they realized that they couldn't really build a bomb. It was not as easy as they thought. So they went old school with an actual revolver and to shoot an industrialist. Well, they were in fact arrested, rightly so, because what they were engaged in was conduct. The minute they started, now keep in mind, a lot of people will bring up this old saw saying, oh, well, speech can be a crime. What about conspiracy? Well, yeah. I mean, if the conspiracy is to build a bomb, yeah, you use words to do that, but the object is still the conduct. They are actively engaged in creating a bomb. So the fact that they use words doesn't mean that you can start prosecuting free speech for the content of the speech. It is that you can prosecute speech when it is part of a concrete conspiracy to commit a specific criminal act. Now, people often point as well to defamation and say, well, Turley seems to forget that you're allowed to bring people into court for defamation. And the answer is, once again, it's an old saw and it's not very convincing. Defamation is a civil action that can be brought against people who say things that harm you. It's the same reason that fraud can be done with words. But there's a difference. Fraud, defamation, is harming an individual or group with a falsehood. You still have to prove falsity, but it is specifically directed to a person or a group. So none of those dogs will hunt for the anti-free speech movement. They repeat these things often, but they're rather fallacious. They're pretty really superficial.